President Barack Obama announcing sweeping changes in the relationship between the United States and the island nation of Cuba. We're going to talk about those here momentarily. Let us now first welcome in former member of the House of Representatives, former chairman of the House Intelligence Committee, Pete Hoekstra joins us today from Washington. Also, let us welcome the managing editor at Newsmax.com, Alina Hernandez. I want to thank you both for joining us. Pete, I'm going to start with you, first of all, from an intelligence standpoint and from the standpoint then of looking at this as recreating the relationship between America and Cuba. Your reaction?
Well, I'm still trying to grasp exactly what the Obama foreign policy is. Consistently, this president has made dramatic shifts in our foreign policy that had effectively worked. And his new policies have not worked out that well, whether it's in Libya, whether it's in Egypt, whether it's in Iraq, whether it's Syria, Russia, Ukraine. The president's sharp shifts seem rather random. They are hodgepodge, and now this new curveball comes in with a reapproachment with Cuba. What is this president's foreign policy? What is his vision and consistent plan for moving America's ideals forward? We've got to take a look at this. We've got to digest it. But right now, I'm just concerned that this president is perhaps in the most dangerous period of this presidency for America. He's looking for an American success in foreign policy, and he's grasping for straws without any real strategy.
All right, Pete, let's play devil's advocate here, though. Is the president then, and in many minds it will be seen this way, basically ending a philosophy and a program for 50 years that hasn't worked?
Well, clearly he's shifting a philosophy that he believes has not worked. There are many in Congress on a bipartisan basis, whether it's Senator Rubio, Senator Menendez, who believe that this was the right policy that we've been engaged in and that it should be continued and ultimately it will work. The question now will be, where will this policy lead, and will it actually strengthen the dictatorship that we have and the brutal regime that we have in Cuba, or will it lead to more openness? That's a big question. And that's going to take some time before we actually get an answer to that question.
Alina, let me come to you next. As a Cuban American, someone who was born in Cuba, someone who has parents there, a lineage there as well, I imagine that, and again, I will have to admit as well that I grew up in South Florida as well, and know a lot of people there who today, quite frankly, will be thrilled that this is happening under any circumstances just to free up what might be a normal relationship with the homeland.
Yes, I think Cuban Americans, we have a very kind of a hypocritical relationship with the island. We really want the Castro brothers out. We want anyone associated with his regime out. And yet we desperately want to see our homeland. We desperately want to, feel the breeze, drink a mojito in Havana, not in Miami. And I think that that's something that, we're the first to fight for the embargo, and yet we're also the first to send lots and lots of money to our relatives there who support who ultimately it supports the regime.
But let's talk about that for a moment here, because even before the president made his statement, Marco Rubio, the U.S. Senator from South Florida, said that he will make every effort to block moves by the president toward normalizing relations with the Cuban government. I would imagine that there is going to be a faction in the Cuban-American community who will say, marvelous idea, exactly what we want. But would I be incorrect in thinking that most Cuban-Americans here right now would say, wait a minute, Senator, back off a little bit because this is actually good? What's your take?
I think that the Cuban community remains somewhat divided, but I will tell you that the hardline position is very, very slowly dying off. I think that you have a significant number of economic refugees here from Cuba who knew nothing but the Cuban regime, and all they want is to be able to work, to live, to earn money, to travel back and forth to see their relatives. So I do think that the hardline position today took a blow. I mean, frankly, the embargo, in my opinion, having lived with it my whole life, has not worked. The embargo is 50 years of bad policy, but it has given us some leverage with the Castro government from time to time. It's done very little but divide families and prevent people from really getting information from outside the island, from pursuing economic freedoms, humanitarian freedoms.
Pete, let me turn this to you now. Is it possible, though, and again, we have to look at all aspects of it, possible, though, that by normalizing these relations with Cuba, it will open the country up? America will, quite frankly, be able to watch their neighbor to the south a little closer than they would have before. We've got the Russians, of course, involved in this. Communism is still all part of this. But isn't this good policy to basically stop punishing the people?
Well, it is possible that the changes that you've outlined may occur. Obviously, it is what happened in Eastern Europe with the fall of the wall and those types of things, that some limited engagement with Eastern Europe enabled them ultimately to, shred the shackles that they had from Russia. We would hope to see the same kind of transformation happen in Cuba. But, we're going to have to dig deeper, peel back the layers, and see exactly what types of conditions the president put on this opening up with Cuba. How much openness will the Cuban regime allow its people to have? Will it foster an environment where we really can have change on the island? I hope that is what has happened, but too many cases with this regime, with this administration here in the United States, we have gone and we have engaged with people who were our enemies, and in exchange for that engagement, we've received nothing in return, whether it's Iran, Hamas, the radical jihadists in Libya, or the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt. None of those came with preconditions that enabled the countries and the people in those countries to move forward and to actually see more freedom and democracy. Let's see what kind of a deal the president has negotiated here in Cuba.
Alina, I think you would have to agree that that also has to be a very big consideration here, that Raul Castro and the government there is simply just using America. They want more money flowing in. They want to fill the coffers of those, quite frankly, who want to get rich off American money and other tourist dollars as well, and still not do enough to help the human rights of the Cuban people themselves. There's got to be that consideration that we're just being used by a government that's never really had much love for us anyway.
Absolutely. I think that unless we see some significant easing of, for example, media, greater telecommunications, I think those are things that should be of a great concern. But right now, in fact, it's a no-brainer for Obama and for Raul Castro. Raul's, European sugar daddies in Spain and in other parts of Europe who are funding many economic projects, they're struggling in Europe. So they're looking for economic assistance. They're looking for help from an outside source. And what better time to do it than now? The embargo really hasn't restricted that travel that much. You could pretty much go under, any kind of educational plan, whether it was to, study in Cuba for a period of a month. I mean, there were quite simple ways to travel to Cuba if you could get one of these licenses. So I do believe that we have to make sure that they are granting some freedoms to the Cuban people, but I think it makes sense for both governments right now. Obama's looking for his moment of good news on the national front, but I also think that Raul Castro is fundamentally seeking additional infusion of money into the island.
All right, let's think about that for just a moment here. I'm going to interrupt you for just one moment because, Pete, I understand that you're going to leave us now. We want to thank you very much for joining us, Pete Hoekstra, and I'm sure we're going to talk again about this and a whole lot more.